ladies and gentlemen, for the opening address on pandemics and blockchain, mitigating the damage and stopping the next one before it starts. We're very elated that we have with us none other than Don Tapscott, the co-founder and executive chairman of the Blockchain Research Institute. Well, Don is one of the world's leading authorities on the impact of technology on business and society. In 2017, Don and Alex co-founded the Blockchain Research Institute, whose 80+ projects are the definitive investigation into blockchain strategy, use cases, implementation challenges, and organizational transformations. He has authored 16 books, including Economics, How Mass Collaboration Changes Everything, which has been translated into over 25+ languages. Don is also a member of the Order of Canada, and in 2019 then ranked as the second most influential management thinker by Thinkers 50, joined Professor Christensen, Michael Porter, Peter Drucker, and others in the Thinkers 50 Hall of Fame. Well, it is hard to imagine anyone who has been more prolific, profound, and influential in explaining today's technological revolutions and their impact on the world. Well, ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome none other than Don Tapscott, co-founder and executive chairman of the Blockchain Research Institute, for the opening address at the World Blockchain Summit. So thank you so much, Don, for joining us today.
Well, I'm happy to be here, as it were. This is a crazy environment that we're all in right now, and I hope that everyone is safe and well. And this certainly will blow over. Right now, I just want to give you a visual on where I am. And power corrupts, but PowerPoint corrupts absolutely. But anyway, I'm going to just share with you a few slides. By the way, if anyone is tweeting this, on Twitter, I'm at dtapscott, at dtapscott. So right now I'm sitting at my lake house up in northern Canada, in the Muskoka region, north of Toronto. And I've been quarantined here with my extended family for almost 4 months now. And this is certainly an unprecedented situation that we're in right now. The economic costs of this pandemic are devastating on a scale perhaps never seen in recent history. The human costs at this stage are unfathomable. And this is one of those rare turning points in history where the COVID-19 pandemic will cause profound changes to our economy, our behavior, our society, and some leaders and governments that failed the challenge will be replaced. Many institutions will be scrutinized and hopefully changed for the better. And the pandemic also revealed deep problems in our systems for innovation, commerce, data, and technology infrastructure. So this conference happens at a very appropriate time. The spread of the virus and our ineptitude to deal with the consequences had a lot to do with data, or lack of it. Clinicians, epidemiologists, government authorities have been working in the dark, and there's been virtually no testing in the early weeks of the outbreak. So there were no early warning systems, at least in Western countries. Supply chains have proven to be inadequate, failing to respond to the need to deliver something as simple as a paper mask. And consumers lacking transparency became fearful and hoarded basic staples, you know, on and on and on. So how can we avoid situations like this in the future? How can we better predict a pandemic and implement strategies to manage it better? And when the dust settles, surely we can be implementing changes so that a pandemic doesn't rip our world in the same way ever again. And now is as good a time to understand what is to be done. And that's what I'd like to share with you in the next 25 minutes, basically, in my talk today. Now, just a little background on me and how I came to this whole blockchain world. I wrote a couple of books in the 1980s that nobody read. I think my mother bought most of the copies. And then I started writing bestsellers in the early 1990s. Paradigm Shift, which is obviously a big book, and The Digital Economy, which they say was the first bestseller about the web in business. And 20 years later, I was asked to write the 20th anniversary edition of The Digital Economy. And I had to think about what's occurred and where are we going. And it occurred to me that we've been through this first era of the digital age. Mainframes, mini computers, PCs, the internet, the web, social media, the mobile web, the cloud, big data, a first era. And now we're moving into a second era where we have technologies that can learn to do things that they weren't programmed to do, where the physical world is becoming animated with billions and trillions of inert objects that can communicate, and soon that can do transactions. Many exciting technologies. And I found myself coming to the surprising conclusion that the foundational technology for this whole next period was in fact blockchain. Now, I don't view this as some interesting new technology like some people do. I think it's the operating system for the second era of the digital age. And in fact, it represents the second era of the internet. So let me explain that. For 40 years, we've had an internet of information. But when someone sends you information like an email, a PDF, you're really getting a copy, not the original. With the internet of information, we each have a printing press at our fingertips, and that's fine. But when it comes to things that really matter to an economy or society, assets, things of value like money, or securities, or say health records, or contracts, or deeds, or loyalty points, or IOUs, intellectual property, the data in our identities, even cultural assets like art or music or votes. A vote's an asset, something of value that belongs to somebody. When it comes to assets, copying those is a bad idea. You don't want someone copying your vote or your identity. And if I send you $1,000, it's really important that I don't still have the money, right? So cryptographers have called this the double payment problem for decades. And the way that we manage this problem in our economy is through middlemen. Banks, stock exchanges, credit card companies, governments, transfer agents, escrow agents, now social media companies. And they perform all of the business and transaction logic for every type of commerce. They identify the asset, that's $1. They identify the parties. They clear and settle transactions. They keep records. And overall, they've done a pretty good job, but there are growing problems. They're all centralized. It means that they can be hacked. And there are two kinds of systems, of these central systems, those that have been hacked and those that will be hacked. They exclude a couple of billion people from the global economy. They take too much of the value for performing this middleman function. Why does it cost 10 to 20% for a housekeeper in Toronto to send money to her mom in Singapore? And why does it take 4 to 7 days? And overall, the biggest problem is that they capture our data, but we can't use the data that we create. We can't use it to plan our lives. We can't monetize it. And our privacy is being undermined. So what if there were not just an internet of information? What if there were an internet of value? Some kind of vast global distributed ledger where anything of value from money to securities to music to votes could be managed, stored, transacted in a secure and private way. What if there were a native digital medium for value like there is for information? Well, 2008, that's what Satoshi cracked. He cracked the double spend problem, and this was the biggest innovation in computer science to me in a generation. Why? Because for the first time in modern history, people and organizations anywhere could do transactions and trust each other peer-to-peer. And trust is not achieved by an intermediary. It's achieved by cryptography, collaboration, and some clever code, which is why we call it the trust protocol. So I had this great analogy for why I thought blockchain was so hard to hack. But John Oliver, who has a big late night TV show in the United States, did a whole show on the topic. And well, you'll see why I don't use the analogy anymore. Let me just run you a clip.
And because of the complicated process the network uses to verify records, it is very secure. Now, relax. I'm not going to get into what that process is or how it works, but I will share a really helpful, really dumb metaphor for why it is safe.
The way I like to think of it is that a blockchain is a highly processed thing, sort of like a chicken McNugget. And if you wanted to hack it, it'd be like turning a chicken McNugget back into a chicken. Now, someday someone will be able to do that, but for now, it's going to be tough.
Hold on. That is an absolutely horrible thought. So why is that reporter so happy about the idea? Because if anyone ever figures out how to turn a chicken McNugget back into a chicken, that chicken is going to be up. He's going to spend the rest of his life suffering from PTSD and writing haunting poetry about the experience. The things I saw, buck, buckaw. My body is whole, but what of my soul?
My body is whole, but what of my soul? So you can see why I don't use the analogy anymore. I still think it's a pretty good analogy. Anyway, so almost 5 years ago, I got lucky with the timing of this book and also with my co-author, my son Alex. And it did become the big global bestseller on the topic. And it's now in 20 languages. And there's a new edition in English, which is outside of the US, this yellow one, or in the US and Canada, the one with the yellow band across the top. And I hope that you'll enjoy it. And shortly after the book came out, I did a TED Talk, which now I guess is the most watched video on the topic of blockchain in the world. And many millions of people have seen that. So what about pandemics? Well, at the Blockchain Research Institute, we're the largest think tank in the world doing research about blockchain opportunities, strategies, issues. And we're trying to bridge the gap between the enormous potential of this technology and the actual deployment. And we're studying a dozen different industries. And within that, there's the topic of blockchain for good. There are all kinds of ways that this technology can help us build a better world. We can instantly include 1 billion people into the global financial system. We can solve the problem 70% of land titles in the world are not enforceable. We can deal with the problem of remittances, $1 trillion business where these people are getting ripped off. One of these is the topic of public health. Now, each of these is a kind of 1-hour talk. If you want to hang in there for another 8 hours, I'm happy to do this, but I think it might mess up the agenda of the conference. So let's talk about public health. There are a lot of different players here, and all of them can be affected profoundly by blockchain. The manufacturers who make stuff, and we're going to change our whole model of manufacturing, not just equipment, but also pharmaceuticals. They're all the wholesalers that move stuff around. They're the pharmacies that have to deal with health records and avoid drug interactions and so on. There are all the hospitals that are brimming with all this smart communicating technology that needs to be able to do transactions. And there are insurance companies that haven't really changed in pretty much half a century. All of these can be transformed by blockchain. Now, when it comes to pandemics, so we need to reinvent public health. Now, just an aside here, in many countries, the United States being a prime example, why is the U.S. such a mess right now? Well, it's not just a problem of the leadership, although that's a big problem, and the way that they're handling the pandemic. But over the last decades, public health institutions have been gutted by cutbacks. Public health, the idea that we have people who work for us, for the government, and they're looking at things like immunization and water quality and safety standards and dealing with things like medical education and so on. All of that has been wiped out. And so the states across the United States have no way, they have no institutions really that can deal with this thing properly. And when it comes to pandemics, there are a lot of big problems that can be addressed by blockchain. Now, don't get me wrong here. Blockchain is not going to solve any problems. Humans solve problems, and we need to find the will to do this. But we have a new technology that gives us a whole new way of solving these problems. Supply chains, they're a mess. Well, the supply chain industry is a $50 trillion industry. If you have it, whatever it is, it came from a supply chain. And think about it. You got all these different parties and manufacturers and sub-manufacturers and lawyers and service providers. Then you got trains, boats, and planes and trucks, and you got all these traditional systems like EDI and ERP, and then you got faxes flying around and emails and bits of paper and escrow agents and transfer agents and people at the border and tax authorities. What if, rather than all of that hodgepodge moving around in a serial way, what if there were a shared network state? A single state, a ledger, where you had a single version of the truth, where you had real-time transactions, no 2 to 3 day settlement period, because the payment and the settlement is the very same activity. Or you could have micropayments, where you could have smart technologies making payments, devices in hospitals, finding the best source of something like power and going on an auction, purchasing that power and paying for it, and establishing their reputation as a trustworthy device. So building a truly just-in-time supply chain, how could that work? Well, the first is tracking and procuring of medical supplies. Fred Smith, I interviewed him a couple of years ago at the opening census of a session of Consensus in New York, thousands of people in the audience. And he founded FedEx. He's the CEO of FedEx. And he said, we invented the chain of custody idea, but now we're going to rebuild that around blockchain, and we're going to start with the logistics industry. We have the authenticity of assets, knowing that that ventilator is a certified ventilator that came from a valid source that's using all of the proper manufacturing techniques and supplies and labor practices and so on. All of the logistics, the transport, and the custody of all of this stuff, a shared network state to track it. And embracing additive manufacturing. So there's a company called Moog, M-O-O-G, that used to make parts for precision aircraft parts for Boeing. They would ship it to Boeing or to Airbus or the big aircraft companies. Now, increasingly, they 3D print those parts right in the plant, and a blockchain platform manages all the transactions. But one of the executives there created a company called Veritex, which is now doing this for medical supplies. So supply chain's number one, big opportunities. Announcing here today, this new book is shipping now in July on Amazon.com. It's my new effort, and I think this supply chain issue is so important. And we actually wrote up a whole section on supply chain and pandemics. So it's the first book to address this issue. And I just saw that it's the number one new release on Amazon.com in the commerce category. All right, second, as I said earlier, this has a lot to do with data. And data is really part of our health record, which is a subset of our overall digital identities. And, all of you have the virtual you. You create this data. Your health data is created by your body. Sure, it's measured by other institutions, but the data is from your body. And more and more, it's like real-time stuff that you can, that your heart rate. It could be your temperature, or whether or not you're coughing or whatever, but your medical record. But that's a subset of all the digital data. And the virtual you knows more about you than you do, because you can't remember where you were a year ago, your exact location, or how you moved around, or who you came in contact with, or you can't remember, what diagnosis you had, or what medication you took, or what you got on a test, or what you purchased. Dozens of categories of data. You create it, but it's not captured by you. It's captured by these big institutions, social media companies, search engines, governments, and others. And there are a bunch of problems. You can't use the data to plan your own health or life. You can't monetize the data, and these institutions are getting wealthy with this new asset class of the digital age. It means that you're going to be hacked, and you're going to be picking up the pieces at some point. It means that your privacy is undermined, and people say, well, Don, privacy is dead, get over it. I think that's foolishness. Privacy is the foundation of freedom, and all this data represents our identities. We need to get them back. And finally, in something like a pandemic, it means that all this data is buried in silos, so we can't aggregate it or pull it out to build early warning systems or to manage something like this better. So imagine if we each had our own self-sovereign health record as part of a broader identity. And in a crisis like this, the state can mandate availability of data. Now, it could be anonymized civilian data about critical health information. If you're sick, the state gets to know about it. Not necessarily to know that you're sick, but it gets to know that this individual is sick and where they're moving around and so on. But as a civilian, you control your digital identity to provide pertinent health information that may help with treatment. So you're going to say, well, if I'm found sick somewhere or unconscious, any certified medical practitioner can access my health record. Maybe not my psychiatric data, but everything else. I mean, we'll all get to decide on that. And then we make incentive systems to make private data available to clinicians and government planners and epidemiologists and so on. And imagine you could have the data, the health data, real time of an entire population instantly available for an early warning system. And then once you're immunized or you've got antibodies or whatever, a health certification is attached to the individual's data identity. How exciting. We can have our cake and eat it too. We can have data for society to solve big problems, and we can protect our own privacy and rights to own that data. And this is possible now because of blockchain. The data moves around with you in a black box and you own it. Thirdly, how do we build incentives for change? And for incentives for people to do the right thing? Well, there are two approaches. One is that the state forces it, and the other is that people act with integrity. Well, it'd be nicer if everyone would just do the right thing without having police out on the street arresting people who are not behaving badly. So imagine if we could tokenize value to create incentives for all kinds of good behavior. You do certain things, you behave in certain ways, and value comes to you in the form of tokens. I'm a co-founder of a company called CarbonX.ca, and we're tokenizing carbon credits so that you'll buy that carbon neutral espresso machine because it comes with all these tokens that are enormously valuable. How do we get the right people, the right skills, the right talent? How do we get them across borders? How do we know where they came from? Well, a couple of big ideas here. We can issue medical certifications on a blockchain, and no one can hack that or mess with that. And we can deploy a global marketplace for talent. And the same as the health credential. And this could be a very powerful thing. And the final one is, as we come out of this, how do we rebuild our economies and sustain the economy? Well, there are lots of things that can be done here, but a very first one is it turns out that cash is not just the foundation of organized crime and the global drug industry and tax evasion. It's dirty. and it has viruses on it. Well, we need to move to digital cash. Self-organizing, sure, like Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. Maybe corporate cash, Libra. Powerful idea. If they can get away with it, and it's a big if, you'd immediately have another 1.5 billion people in the global financial system. And state-based or central bank digital currencies, which is the really huge one right now. And the whole world is thinking about this. Part because China is driving it with their central bank digital currency called the DCEP. And if they go ahead and do that, it's not if, when they do, and they will fairly soon, this could threaten the supremacy of the dollar. And they'll roll it out across Southeast Asia, into One Belt, One Road, into Singapore, into Africa, and replace the US dollar as the currency of record. So the Fed is scrambling. Mark Carney says we should have a global hegemonic cryptocurrency. This issue is discussed at length in another new book I'm happy to announce today by Alex Tapscott. And it is a gorgeous book, The Financial Services Revolution, How Blockchain is Transforming Money, Markets, and Banking. And it's available on Amazon. Okay, so digital cash is one thing. Supply chain finance. Supply chains are moving, and the trade finance is moving to blockchain. Insurance and risk management. And of course, new high-performance business models as we come out of this, because blockchain is at the heart of the reinvention of innovation and of the corporation. Talent and capability and assets can be outside now the boundaries of a firm. And wealth creation and innovation is becoming more decentralized. This is a huge change to the deep structure, architecture of the corporation and how we orchestrate capability in society to innovate, to create goods and services, and so on. So let me end with a couple of thoughts. One is this document is now available. All you got to do is go to blockchainresearchinstitute.org or .com, and right there on the front page, you can have a free copy of this. We got some big challenges to adoption. This stuff is bringing about profound changes. Why is it taking a long time? The Internet of Information, you put up a website and in a week you're in business. With blockchain, you're changing a $50 trillion supply industry. You're changing a $200 trillion financial services industry. This is a big deal, and it's going to take a while. We need to address issues like scalability and interoperability and things like Hyperledger, Besu, and Cosmos, the Internet of Blockchains. Extraordinary. Blockchain has an image problem. It's largely unfair. Criminals can use it. Criminals always use new technology before anybody else. Maybe 1% of blockchain or Bitcoin transactions are for nefarious purposes. 3% of cash is used for crime. And we have bad legislation in most places in the world. So this is typical when you get a new paradigm. You get these legacy attitudes. And leaders of old paradigms have difficulty embracing the new. I'm old enough to remember in 1977 when Ken Olsen, the CEO of the largest computer company in the world, Digital Equipment Corporation, said there's no reason for any individual to have a computer in his home. Famous last words. And so how is your company going to find leadership for change? Well, this is what we're doing at the BRI. And just a couple of things. Take a picture of this screen, a screen grab, because there's a 25% off. We spent $1 million developing these courses. They're on Coursera, the largest platform for blockchain education, and in partnership with INSEAD, one of the top business schools in the world. And we are also, in October 29th and 30th, we're going to have a physical meeting, distanced, of course, but it'll mainly be online, and it'll look like a TV show. And we just last week held the Enterprise Blockchain Awards, and we did that using holograms, where we were beamed onto a virtual stage, and we'll be able to do stuff like that. we're growing in influence, and we like that because, and we'll be out as these events open up. Some of these are huge. That was 29,000 people. I spoke at it. Barack Obama did the close. And it's time to clear the mud off the windshield about this technology. So let me end with a thought. Can you do this? To me, the future is not something to be predicted. It's something to be achieved. And we can achieve a very different future if we want. To close, an analogy. At the Blockchain Research Institute, we've been studying nature to learn more about decentralized systems. Fish come in schools, bees come in swarms, starlings over the moors of England and other places in the world, they come in something called a murmuration. Murmuration. It's a word in the English dictionary. And it refers to the murmuring of the wings of the birds. And starlings are out over a 25 kilometer radius doing their starling thing. And at night they come together and create one of the most spectacular things in nature. The murmuration has a number of functions, but the really big one, it's not just for show. The big one is to protect the birds. You can see on the right of the screen here a hawk. That's a predator of starlings, 25 times the size of a starling, being chased away by the collective power of the little birds. And scientists that have studied this say they've never seen an accident. There's leadership, but there's no one leader. And when the moment is right, magic happens. So is this some kind of fanciful analogy, or might we learn something from it? Well, the murmuration functions according to the principles of the trust protocol, which I've been outlining to you. It's a big collaboration. Remember I said that trust is not achieved by a middleman, it's achieved by collaboration, cryptography, and some clever code. There's clever code in the DNA of the birds. They give it rules. Big rule is don't bump into anyone else, but another rule is don't get too far away. And the murmuration has a great interdependence. If I'm speaking to a business audience, CEOs, I'll often say, I don't think business can succeed in a world that's failing. And this pandemic has certainly shown us that. And the murmuration functions as if the individual birds and their interests are connected to the interests of the murmuration as a whole. And finally, the murmuration has a great integrity. Integrity. And that's the foundation of trust. Because what is trust? Well, to me, trust is the expectation that the other party will act with integrity. Trust is the expectation that the other party will act with integrity, that they will do the right thing. Which is why a little bird will chase a killer 25 times its size, because it knows that the other birds will have its back and do the right thing. Imagine if we could connect ourselves on this planet with some kind of vast network of glass and air and cryptography and smart code. What kind of intractable problems could we solve? Could we have early warning systems that stop pandemics in their tracks? What other challenges? Climate change, building a more fair and open and just world. I look at this thing and I get a lot of hope that this more decentralized world that my grandchildren will inherit might actually be a better one. And that the digital economy may, and its promise, may finally be fulfilled. So thank you very much, and have a terrific conference together.
Thank you so much, Don. It was spectacular and amazing to hear you. Don, there is one question, if you would you have the time on you, if I could ask you that, please.
Sure.
Audience?
Yes.
So Don, there is Rohit who asks that what do you need to tweak for the faster adoption of this blockchain technology especially in the financial services, capital markets, banking. Could you address on that, please?
Yes, I alluded to it quickly, but there are four big problems that need to be fixed. One is that blockchain has an image problem, and we still have people thinking that this is about nefarious activities, and that's largely unfair, but we need to overcome it. Secondly, you need to understand that this is not going to be really fast. It's going to take some time. You know, just an example, the executives at FedEx say, you know, with the old world of IT, we'd come up with a great system. We'd put a FedEx logo on it, and we'd roll it out to the world, and we'd dominate a whole industry. Now you can't do that. You want to change the logistics industry, you need standards throughout the whole industry. What is a bill of lading? You need all of the players and even the competitors of FedEx to participate in building those standards. So one of the executives there says FedEx, that blockchain is a team sport and that they need to bring a whole industry together. That's going to take a while. We're changing very profound things, like the nature of the whole financial industry, which goes back kind of a long time, the nature of money. There are other problems too. There's the challenge of governance of all this technology, and it's still relatively immature. By governance, I don't mean government, I mean stewardship. Like the Internet of Information is governed by a set of multi-stakeholder networks that have developed. You have standards networks like the Internet Engineering Task Force. You have policy networks like the Internet Governance Forum. There are advocacy networks like the Electronic Frontier Foundation. There are knowledge networks like the Internet Society. There are operational networks that just do things like ICANN. ICANN just does things. They don't develop policy or anything else. They just deliver domain names. We're very immature in that area, which is why we at the BRI spend so much time on this issue of governance. And related to that is the challenge of government regulation, that the regulatory environment around financial services is built towards an old model of what is financial services. And that will take time to change. And the final one is that we need to solve these technical problems still. They're getting a lot better, but interoperability and scalability are the two sides of this. You know, the Internet of Information is a set of networks that interoperate together. They're similar networks. Blockchain is not. And if you don't have interoperability, it doesn't just mean that you can't move assets around and do transactions. It means that you have much weakened scalability. If all those networks came together, the transaction capability then would be much greater. Which is why I mentioned things like Cosmos, the Internet of Blockchains, and Hyperledger Consensus is doing some big, Consensus Systems doing some big things with Ethereum now, and this is good progress. On the other hand, people that like Gartner who say this is just not happening, you know, on blockchain, it'll just be an add-on to ERP or CRM, are deeply misinformed. And at the BRI, we're conducting 110 projects looking at operational implementations, the issues, the opportunities, the strategies, and the problems. So I'll close by saying it may be a little self-serving, but we need to educate the world too. Please register for our courses on Coursera, Blockchain Revolution courses, and pick up the new books by me and Alex Tapscott. And if you're from a big company, I'd love to hear about you personally. info@blockchainresearchinstitute.org. Well, this data, the information is right here, or info@tapscott.com. And we'd love to find a way to work with you. So thanks very much and have a great conference.
Thank you so much, Don, for joining us. Thank you once again.